The German government recently released this historic paper. It's their first ever national defense strategy, and its 76 pages outline a radical new plan for how to confront the security challenges they're faced with. It's kind of like having a vision board where you pin up and share all your aspirations and goals, but for a bureaucracy. This was paired with a revolutionary increase of $107 billion in military spending over the course of 3 years. But why all these drastic changes all of a sudden? German defense official Eva Hoegal warned that they, quote, have too little of everything, including spare parts, tents, modern radios, body armor, tanks, and even submarines straight across the board. In fact, multiple reports have claimed that if war were to break out tomorrow, Germany would only have enough ammunition to last for about 2 days of fighting. Those eye-catching headlines make a really good point, but they don't account for the fact that ammo would be shared between NATO allies. However, I love a juicy military alarmism story as much as the next defense YouTuber. In response, the German government plans to reverse this trend by growing from roughly 180,000 to 203,000 personnel by 2031. What challenges will they face in attempting to do that? And is it really feasible? What new types of weapon systems, units, and tactics is the German Bundeswehr acquiring to modernize and revamp their forces? And in what ways has their history informed their rearmament today? But first, if you're like me, or most people, and you wish you had a better handle on your debt, you should check out today's video sponsor, PDS Debt. They're a Google top-rated company with an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, probably because they've helped so many people manage their debt. With customized options that consolidate debts into one low monthly payment, PDS Debt can help relieve the pressure mounting from those credit cards, loans, collections, or medical bills. Anyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt is qualified for debt relief, and there's no minimum credit score required, and PDS Debt customizes their approach to match each individual person because they really care about helping people get out from under their debt. Getting into debt is easy, but getting out can feel like climbing out of a hole that just keeps getting deeper. The key is to make sure you're not the only one climbing. The help is out there thanks to PDS Debt. Right now, PDS Debt is offering free debt analysis, and it only takes 30 seconds. Head over to pdsdebt.com/task23 to get your free debt assessment today. Almost 8 decades ago, at the end of World War II, in 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The Allied powers of the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union occupied the nation, completely disbanding their remaining 1 million personnel. This was driven by the atrocities committed by the German Third Reich, which left millions dead and untold millions more lives ruined. Shortly afterwards, in 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany was established, and since then they've had deeply held pacifist beliefs that are ingrained in their constitution. So what led to the unlikely recreation of their military after the Allied powers had already four-way pinky promised that they would never allow that to happen again for a third time? So following the war, Germany was split between the Western powers on one side and the Soviet Union on the other. This unclassified RAND report from the US Army outlined how the Soviets and Western powers both dismantled German arms plants and carted them away to their own territory. Disarmament was going swimmingly, straight to plan. However, there was instantly geopolitical tension between the two sides. From the Western perspective, 3 major events happened in just 3 years. First, the Soviet Union's 1948 blockade of Berlin. Second, the Soviets' first atomic bomb in 1949. And third, the Soviet-backed North Korean invasion of South Korea in 1950. Wham bam thank you ma'am. There were fears, founded in reality or not, that East Germany would invade West Germany in a similar manner. Many people forget that the Warsaw Pact maintained a conventional superiority over NATO, with an imbalance of power strongly in their favor. This declassified top-secret CIA report admits of a vast numerical disadvantage for NATO. And so in 1955, at the insistence of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and American President Dwight Eisenhower, the new German Bundeswehr was created to fill this massive manpower gap. Germany's first chancellor, Adenauer, reluctantly agreed after stating he did not want to establish another military. The Bundeswehr is a German term for the entire federal defense forces, including the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Take a look at Article 87A of the German Constitution titled Bundeswehr Restriction. It outlines how their armed forces' size must be transparent, operate under civilian control, and can only be used for self-defense or humanitarian intervention. This provision was implemented as a safeguard against the reemergence of aggressive militarism in post-war Germany. It reflected the country's commitment to peaceful coexistence and international law. In 1945, famous German statesman Willy Brandt said, quote, "Unconditional acknowledgement of the crimes that were committed against other peoples by Germans and in the name of Germany is the first precondition for a recovery of the German people." And this was the perspective that the nation aimed to take following the war, to take responsibility for their actions. And so in 1956, compulsory military service was enacted in West Germany to conscript thousands, as NATO stated that they required 500,000 additional forces for a feasible defense against the Warsaw Pact. Defense spending rose to 4.9% of GDP in Germany by 1964, and they reached 500,000 troops by 1973 as the Cold War heated up. NATO allowed them to increase investments in domestic arms production, with their company Krauss-Maffei pumping out over 6,000 Leopard 1 main battle tanks. By 1989, they had over 7,000 armored vehicles, 1,000 combat aircraft, 18 surface-to-air missile battalions, 40 missile boats, and 24 submarines, as well as several destroyers and frigates. Even still, NATO was outnumbered by about 1 million troops and had less than half the amount of armored vehicles than the Warsaw Pact. But from day one, the Bundeswehr was an integral part of NATO's deterrence policy. In fact, according to the German government, this accounted for roughly 50% of NATO's total land forces in the region. So how was the public comfortable with such a large German standing army? From Germany's perspective, the Bundeswehr's job was to protect their personal freedoms. They could look across the divided nation and see how life in East Germany was marked by a variety of hardships and atrocities under communist rule. Many East Germans lost their lives attempting to flee to the West, and uprisings were violently put down. That is, until 1989. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the people of Germany finally had one positive historical event to rejoice over in the last 100 years. West and East German families reunited, and so too did their militaries. They absorbed about 50,000 East German soldiers and 2,750 armored vehicles, including BMPs and T-72s, which they were now lousy with. In 1990, the Bundeswehr had this enormous combined army ammo stockpile and was capable of fielding 215 highly ready combat battalions. So how did that force shrink, leading to some of the challenges that they're faced with today? Who rests, rusts. Take a look at these pictures of the Martyrer Graveyard. In 1990, a little-known treaty on conventional armed forces in Europe was signed by NATO and the Warsaw Pact. The agreement placed strict limits on conventional weapons for both sides. Over 52,000 armored vehicles, including hundreds of German Martyrer IFVs like this, were torn apart and destroyed in the first 2 years on both sides. This is the year when defense spending fell below 2% and would stay that way for decades in Germany. Since there was no longer an immediate security threat on Germany's borders, their large standing army had less justification. 10 years later, by the year 2000, they were cut down to 300,000 troops, and defense spending fell to 1.3%. Between 1987 and 2014, the US military closed 34 bases inside Germany and shrank down from about 490,000 troops to a low of 67,000 stationed there. In 1990, they took on their first foreign peacekeeping mission in Kosovo, and in 2001, Germany deployed in support of combat operations in Afghanistan. In 2003, the German government was the first allied nation to condemn the United States' decision to invade Iraq and refused to send forces to support the mission. The international financial crisis of 2008 saw further cuts to Germany's defense. By 2011, their forces shrank to their lowest number of about 177,000 soldiers. That same year, the German parliament suspended military conscription 55 years after it was introduced. Germany had gone down from 215 to 34 battalions. This graphic, created by the German publication Spiegel International, visually shows just how much the Bundeswehr shrank from 1989 to today. Tanks down from 4,700 to 300, 18 less submarines, and 390 less combat aircraft. Peace is not everything, but everything is nothing without peace. At the end of the Cold War, as more countries chose to join the NATO alliance, Germany has since enjoyed a new geopolitical reality in Central Europe. They're now surrounded on all sides by allies. Looking to the left and to the right, Germany can only see friends as far as the eye can see. Instead of being on the front lines of an ideological battle and possibly ground zero for a third world war, Germany no longer had to carry that burden, which had now been shifted over to Poland and the Baltic states over 400 miles away. Germany and other European countries then benefited from a concept known as the peace dividend, which emerged as a popular phrase at the end of the Cold War. Peace dividend refers to the economic and social benefit that arises when a nation reduces its military spending and reallocates those resources to other areas of public spending. During this time, Germany became an economic powerhouse in Europe with an explosion in productivity. And personally, I think these things are good. It's a good thing that the military was able to shrink during times of peace. However, sometimes that can lead to outright neglect. There have since been reports of shortages of body armor, 40-year-old radio equipment that's analog and easy to intercept transmissions, including low readiness levels for key armored vehicles that are a consequence of these cuts. The enemy of a good plan is the dream of a perfect plan. In 2014, they slammed on the brakes on this trend. Russia's annexation of Crimea changed the entire conversation. In 2015, just a year later, the German government decided to refurbish 100 previously mothballed Leopard 2 tanks instead of melting them down. In May 2016, we observed Germany approve a reversal in their policy by lifting personnel caps. On the strategic level, this is when we see Germany openly say in their government defense documents, quote, German security policy also has to take account of developments in geographically remote regions, insofar as they affect our interests, end quote. They're articulating for the first time that their national security has shifted from defending their own territories to helping defend their allies. Zeitenwende. It's a German term that roughly translates in English to turning point or changing of an era. It signifies a transformative period in history. In February of 2022, days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz used this term in his speech to describe the upcoming changes in their defense policy. Reaching 2% of GDP for the first time since 1990, Zeitenwende, being able to deploy a whole division of 30,000 troops to support NATO, boom, Zeitenwende, breaking the taboo post-war policy of not exporting arms to a war zone by sending tanks and heavy weapons to Ukraine. That's a German Zeitenwende right to the teeth. Admitting to my wife it was actually me who farted. Zeitenwende. The German government in 2023, their defense policy guideline outlined some of these new Zeitenwendes. Okay, I'm done saying that now. In this document, they outline how for the first time, the new German government has agreed to maintain a contingent of troops outside their borders on a permanent deployment. 4,800 German soldiers and 200 civilians will live in Lithuania full-time, not on a rotational basis. This will include at least 44 Leopard 2A7 tanks and 44 Puma infantry fighting vehicles by 2027. Lithuania was specifically chosen because of their strategic geographic position for the NATO alliance bordering Russian Kaliningrad, and having part of the potentially vulnerable Suwalki Gap within their borders. This helps explain the tactical changes. But what about the 10,000-mile-high strategy changes? The wealthy nations will not remain wealthy if the poorhouses of humanity increase. When we think of modern Germany, we typically think of an economic power with $4 trillion GDP a year and the most populous country of 83 million people. It even says this in their defense document, quote, as the most populous country and the largest economy in the heart of Europe, Germany bears special responsibility for peace, security, prosperity, and stability. But the German public has mixed thoughts on this idea, that Germany will play a leadership role. According to recent polls, 72% of Germans said that they don't want Germany to play a military leadership role in Europe today. However, in a seemingly contradictory poll at the same time, 78% of German public support the increased defense spending. Polls are always going to be taken with a grain of salt, and as an American who has trouble pronouncing words with more than 2 syllables, I'm definitely qualified to interpret what they mean. My guess is that the German people believe that they should support their own national defense and help their European allies, while also not taking the lead in that support. Like any strategic document, their first national security document uses purposefully vague bureaucratic terms and phrases. But the key concepts behind Germany's national defense strategy that you need to know about is a concept known as integrated defense. We see the term on the front page, but at first glance it almost sounds like meaningless military jargon. What it really means is that every level of society, from the government to the business sector, needs to interact with each other towards the shared goal of security. Nowhere is this more clear than the key concept of sustainability. The word appears 55 times in the document on nearly every page: sustainability. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Germany heavily relied on Russia for its energy. At one point, they were importing roughly 65% of their gas and a third of their oil from Russia. This was not very sustainable. It was a dependency, worse than that time I got hooked on phonics. There was a fear that Russia could leverage this to decrease Germany's economic output or freeze them out during the winter. In a matter of just mere months, Germany was able to reopen coal-fired power plants, delayed plans to shut down their nuclear power plants, and they're no longer reliant on Russian energy. This is a national security problem that has nothing to do with infantry, it's nothing to do with how many artillery pieces or tanks are produced, although those are certainly important aspects. But this is what integrated defense means. This is one of the major shifts in mentality compared to the global war on terror. Modern war is determined by more than the barrel of a gun, and it takes an integrated approach with different aspects of civil society and the military working in cooperation to address threats like energy sustainability. I think I need to wash my mouth out to get the taste of all those defense buzzwords out. The other two key words from the National Defense Strategy are robustness and resilience, which sounds like adjectives a chef would use, and maybe that's accurate. Maybe we're cooking up a delicious defense strategy here. They state that the special fund that was created in Germany right after the invasion was for $107 billion, which will be used specifically to procure new equipment. What equipment exactly? Military acquisitions are by no means easy. It takes millions of billions of dollars over long periods of time and requires massive resources. Germany's arms industry has been called Europe's arsenal of democracy, since it's one of the largest and most technologically advanced, with over 135,000 German workers. Krauss Maffei and Rheinmetall have produced over 3,600 Leopard 2 tanks for 18 different countries around the world. Rheinmetall just broke ground on a new artillery shell production plant in Germany. Current estimates place Rheinmetall's production. It will reach 1,155 artillery shells annually by 2027. Germany is now the 7th top defense spender in the world. This perplexed me a bit. Why is it hard for Germany to produce weapons for themselves than for other countries? It's partly because of how the German military budget is structured. Because of the obvious historical examples, the German government focuses on high levels of transparency and bureaucratic accountability. While this is good for things like democracy and preventing corruption and the over-consolidation of power, it can make certain things a little bit more difficult in the realm of military budgets, kind of on purpose by design. The Bundeswehr's budget is determined on a year-by-year basis, which means in the past the budget has fluctuated. This makes it difficult to make long-term plans with an unstable yearly funding that doesn't roll over into the next year. So this malaise of bureaucratic nightmare meant that the Bundeswehr has been stuck making short-term fixes to their problems. And they have their share of problems. Here are the challenges the German military is facing. The first is a shortage of spare parts and ammo. On paper, Germany operates about 295 main battle tanks. However, according to reports directly from the Bundeswehr themselves, only 30% of them are operational at any given time. There have also been reports of Germany's PZH-2000 artillery only being 40% operational, and that a year ago they only had 20,000 artillery shells stockpiled. In Western militaries like the United States, the term operational can be difficult to pin down. In the United States, for instance, if you break a windshield wiper on a truck, it's considered to be non-operational. However, some units in Germany are genuinely experiencing readiness problems due to budget cuts. A recent live fire test found that 18 out of 18 of the Bundeswehr's Puma infantry fighting vehicles had malfunctions in their turret preventing them from firing, which led to Germany pausing orders for that vehicle. This all reminds me of something we used to do in training in the American military. Anytime we were doing training without blanks, we would yell budget cuts every time we pretended to fire because they weren't issuing blanks or ammo to train with. Orders are being made though. Germany currently has plans to upgrade their mechanized infantry forces with 133 of the latest iteration of Boxer heavy weapons by 2030. These will be the core of what Germany is calling a homogeneous brigade on wheels that will see the addition of the Patria 6x6 vehicles. These lighter armored vehicles are intended to serve more behind the lines in support roles rather than direct combat positions. Add to this an additional 18 of the next generation Leopard 2A tanks and up to 28 new PZH-2000 artillery pieces. This is all done to help increase numbers, which might be one of their most difficult challenges, because Germany has an aging demographic and nearly 20,000 troops leave the service each year, which means that they would need to recruit 22,000 every year to hit their target of gaining 18,000 new soldiers by 2031, something that just does not seem to be possible right now at the current rate. Germany is now beginning the replacement process for a fleet of multi-role Tornado aircraft designed in the 1970s. Germany's ordered 35 of the F-35As from Lockheed Martin, the first fifth-generation aircraft in the Luftwaffe, in addition to the 15 retrofitted Euro aircraft for electronic warfare. However, these can only cover down on a handful of the missions set that were carried out by the Tornado and aren't intended to replace it fully. The idea behind this special fund of $100 billion is to be able to take advantage of the present state of the military technology and move past the bureaucratic red tape that has held the Bundeswehr back. This massive injection of funds into the German defense industry is supposed to allow for longer planning horizons, which gives the military and the private industry the time they need to broker deals, rebuild ammo stocks, and conduct proper research and development, and properly integrate the shiny pieces of hardware. Everything has an end, only the sausage has too. Despite the addition of 100 billion euros to their budget, progress so far has been slower than hoped. Over a year after the increased budgets, criticism began to arise that the German army had even less equipment than the year prior, and that none of the 100 billion had been spent yet. This might be the first time I've heard people complaining that the government spent no money. To the first point, the primary depletion of equipment from Germany over the past 2 years has actually been due to donations to Ukraine, including hundreds of vehicles, body armor, and weapons that span from rifles to artillery guns. And similar to how other countries are donating to Ukraine, the new influx of defense funds will be going towards replacing those specific equipment losses. The ultimate goal of Germany is to have a fully operational, combat-ready division by 2025, as part of NATO's Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, or JTFV. This would be a combat readiness formation that would be made up of about 30,000 Bundeswehr troops, ready to fight at a moment's notice. This is 5 times the size of the current readiness force of just 6,000 troops. Hopefully Germany is able to reach those requirements, although the German government is already talking about possibly needing to increase spending to 3.5% of GDP. As of 2023, the Treaty of Conventional Armed Forces in Europe that was signed at the end of the Cold War has now been suspended by Russia, Germany, Poland, the United States, just to name a few. And so Germany's first national defense strategy marks a pivotal shift in their defense policy, emphasizing integrated defense to confront contemporary security challenges. This comprehensive approach, supported by a substantial increase in defense spending, reflects Germany's commitment to modernizing its military while balancing its historical pacifism with the urgent need to adapt to a changing geopolitical landscape. And if you guys have a minute, the American F-22 Raptor is getting a huge upgrade to the Super Raptor. If you want to learn about that and its plans to dominate in the Pacific, check out this video up here in the corner of the screen, and I'll put a link in the description. It's the Super Raptor video if you type it in Google for YouTube. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Thank you for watching. If you found this episode valuable in some way, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. Join our Discord channel. We have an active community of over 5,000 members who are interested in geopolitics and military equipment.